Man returns from death with a horrifying message from Jesus. The fire was relentless. Jack could feel the oppressive heat even through his thick firefighting gear as flames roared through the warehouse, consuming everything in their path. The smoke billowed like a living creature, dark and suffocating, coiling upward and escaping through cracks in the shattered windows. Alarms blared in the distance, blending with the urgent shouts of his team as they coordinated their efforts to contain the inferno. This was one of the worst fires Jack had ever seen in his 20 years as a firefighter, but he had faced danger countless times before. He knew the risks, but he also knew the stakes. Lives were hanging in the balance. Jack moved quickly, scanning the chaotic scene for anyone trapped. The team had already pulled out several workers, but reports suggested there was still someone inside. He gripped his radio tightly, his voice steady despite the chaos. "I'm going in. There's one more unaccounted for." "Jack, wait!" His captain's voice crackled through the radio. "The structure's not stable. It's too dangerous." Jack hesitated for a split second, but then he heard it, a faint cry for help over the roar of the flames. His instincts took over. "I'm not leaving anyone behind," he replied, determination lacing his words. He pushed forward, ducking under a collapsed beam and navigating through a maze of burning debris. The heat was unbearable, searing through his gear and making every breath a struggle. He followed the sound of the cries, finally spotting a man huddled in a corner, his face streaked with soot and fear. "I've got you," Jack said, his voice calm and reassuring. He grabbed the man's arm and helped him to his feet. "Stay close to me and don't stop moving." The two began their perilous journey back through the flames, Jack shielding the man as best he could. They were almost to the exit when the unthinkable happened. A beam above them groaned under the weight of the collapsing structure. Jack looked up just in time to see it fall. He shoved the man forward, out of harm's way, but the beam came crashing down, pinning Jack beneath it. Pain shot through his body, sharp and unforgiving. He could hear his team shouting his name, their voices muffled by the roar of the fire. Smoke filled his lungs, and his vision began to blur. The last thing he saw was the man he had saved being dragged to safety by another firefighter. Then, everything went dark. When Jack opened his eyes, he expected to feel the searing pain of his injuries or the suffocating weight of the beam. But instead, he felt nothing. No pain, no heat, no struggle to breathe. He looked around, confused. The warehouse was gone. In its place was a vast, dark void, stretching endlessly in every direction. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint echo of his own heartbeat. Jack tried to move, but he wasn't sure if he even had a body anymore. He felt weightless, as though he were floating in an endless sea of nothingness. Panic began to creep in. "Where am I?" he thought. "Am I dead?" As if in response, a light appeared in the distance. It was small at first, a faint glimmer in the darkness, but it grew rapidly, filling the void with a warm, golden glow. Jack felt himself being drawn toward it, not by force but by an instinctual pull, as though the light was calling him. He moved toward it, unsure of what he would find, but unable to resist. The closer he got, the more the light seemed to envelop him, washing over him in waves of warmth and peace. The darkness melted away, replaced by a landscape so beautiful it took his breath away, if he was even breathing. The ground beneath him shimmered like polished gold, and the air was alive with a gentle hum, a melody that resonated deep within his soul. He felt a profound sense of love and belonging, a peace unlike anything he had ever known. Then he saw the figure. At first, it was just a silhouette against the brilliance of the light, but as it moved closer, Jack could see that it was a man, radiating a presence so powerful and compassionate that Jack fell to his knees. He didn't need to ask who it was. He knew. "Jesus," Jack whispered, his voice trembling. The figure smiled, and Jack felt his heart swell with an indescribable warmth. Jesus extended a hand to him, and Jack took it, his own hand shaking. The touch was gentle, but filled with an energy that coursed through Jack's entire being, making him feel alive in a way he never had before. "You are here for a reason," Jesus said, his voice calm and filled with authority. "Your time is not yet over, but there is something you must see, something you must understand before you return." Jack nodded, his mind racing. "What do you mean? What am I supposed to see?" Jesus gestured, and the golden light around them began to shift and swirl. Colors danced and morphed, forming shapes and images that Jack couldn't quite make sense of. He felt a mixture of anticipation and dread, knowing that whatever he was about to witness would change him forever. He braced himself, ready to face whatever came next. Jack stood motionless, his gaze locked on the swirling colors and shapes forming in the golden light. It was as though the very fabric of reality was bending and shifting before him, pulling him into a vision of the world he had left behind. The air around him felt charged, almost electric, and the presence of Jesus beside him brought both comfort and an unshakable sense of gravity. "You have been brought here to witness," Jesus said, his voice calm, yet filled with an authority that resonated deep within Jack's soul. "There are truths you must see and understand. The world is at a crossroads, and the choices of humanity will determine its path." Jack opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, the swirling light solidified into a vivid scene. He was suddenly standing above the earth, as though he were looking down from the heavens. The planet turned slowly beneath him, its surface alive with motion and energy. At first, the view was breathtaking. He saw cities bustling with life, families gathering in joy, and communities coming together to help one another. It was a picture of humanity at its best, filled with light and hope. But the scene began to shift. The vibrant colors dimmed, replaced by shadows creeping across the landscapes. Jack saw conflicts erupting in the streets, people shouting angrily at one another, families torn apart by bitterness, and leaders standing at podiums, their words sowing division instead of unity. Natural disasters unfolded in horrifying detail, floods consuming entire towns, wildfires raging uncontrollably, and storms tearing through communities. The beauty Jack had seen just moments before was replaced by chaos and despair. His heart ached as he turned to Jesus. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked, his voice trembling. "To understand the stakes," Jesus replied. "The forces of light and darkness are always at work, shaping the hearts and minds of humanity. But now, the balance is tipping. Fear, hatred, and greed have allowed the darkness to grow bolder. Yet, even in the darkest moments, there is light. It is never extinguished." The images shifted again, narrowing their focus. Jack found himself standing in the middle of a great storm. The wind howled, and rain poured from the sky, but he was unharmed, as though the elements couldn't touch him. At the center of the storm stood a man, larger than life, his figure commanding yet vulnerable. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the man. Donald Trump. Trump stood amidst the chaos, his face a mixture of determination and weariness. Around him swirled two distinct forces. On one side were figures cloaked in light, their presence calm and steady. They extended their hands toward him, their intentions clear, to guide, to support, and to lead him toward truth and righteousness. On the other side were figures shrouded in shadow, their forms indistinct and their movements insidious. They whispered in his ear, their words inaudible, but their intent unmistakable. They pulled at him with invisible strings, their influence subtle yet powerful. Jack watched, his heart pounding. "Why him?" he asked, turning to Jesus. "Why is he at the center of all this?" Jesus' gaze remained fixed on the storm. Because his influence reaches far and wide, his choices carry weight that extends beyond borders and generations. But like all leaders, he is human, and he is surrounded by forces that seek to sway him, for good or for ill. Jack studied the scene, feeling a mixture of confusion and unease. The storm around Trump intensified, the forces of light and darkness clashing violently. Jack could see the toll it was taking on the man, the strain etched into his face. "What can be done?" Jack asked. "How can he withstand this? How can anyone?" "The answer lies not in him alone," Jesus said. "It lies in humanity as a whole. Leaders do not act in isolation. They are shaped by the voices around them, by those who pray for them, hold them accountable, and guide them toward truth. Vigilance is needed, not just for him, but for all who hold power." The scene shifted again, showing Jack visions of leaders throughout history. He saw moments of great triumph, where decisions guided by faith and humility had led to unity and progress. But he also saw moments of failure, where pride and deceit had sown division and destruction. Each leader stood at a crossroads, their actions influenced by the forces around them. Jack turned to Jesus, his voice filled with urgency. "What can I do? I'm just one man. How can I possibly make a difference in something so much bigger than me?" Jesus placed a hand on Jack's shoulder, his touch radiating a warmth that steadied Jack's trembling frame. The smallest acts of faith can ripple outward in ways you cannot see. Speak the truth. Pray for wisdom. Encourage others to seek light and reject darkness. You are not called to change the entire world on your own, but to be a spark that ignites others. Jack nodded, the weight of the message sinking in. The storm around Trump faded, replaced by the swirling light of the vision. Jack felt a profound sense of responsibility, but also a flicker of hope. The task ahead was daunting, but he knew he had been chosen for a reason. As the vision began to dissolve, Jack turned to Jesus one last time. "Will they listen?" he asked. "Some will," Jesus replied, "and through them the light will grow. But the path is not without challenges. The darkness will not yield easily, and vigilance will always be required. Remember this: the light within you is never extinguished, no matter how great the storm." With those words, the radiant realm began to fade, and Jack felt himself being pulled back toward the world he had left behind. The message burned in his heart, clear and unshakable. He didn't know how he would fulfill his mission, but he knew one thing for certain: he would not be the same man when he returned. The radiant realm began to shift, and Jack felt a strange sensation wash over him. It was as though the air itself had changed, becoming denser and heavier. The warmth and serenity of Jesus' presence lingered, but a subtle tug pulled at him, urging him back toward the world he had left behind. Jack didn't want to go. The peace he felt in this place was unlike anything he had ever known, and the thought of returning to his broken, battered body filled him with dread. Yet he knew he couldn't stay. The mission he had been given burned in his chest, a clear and undeniable purpose. Jesus stood before him, his gaze steady but filled with compassion. "You have seen what you needed to see," he said. "Now you must return and carry this message forward. The world needs light-bearers, Jack, and you have been chosen to be one of them." Jack swallowed hard, his throat dry despite the weightlessness of his surroundings. "But what if I fail? What if no one believes me?" "Truth carries its own power," Jesus replied. "It is not your task to force others to believe, but to plant the seed. Trust that the light you carry will find those who need it." Before Jack could respond, the golden light around him began to fade, replaced by a swirling darkness that made him feel as though he were falling. The sensation was both disorienting and terrifying. He tried to hold on to the memory of Jesus' words, but the pull of reality grew stronger, drowning out everything else. With a sudden, jarring gasp, Jack's eyes snapped open. Pain flooded his senses, sharp and unrelenting. His body felt like it had been crushed beneath the weight of 1,000 stones. Blinding lights from the fire trucks and ambulances pierced his vision, and the acrid smell of smoke filled his lungs. He was back at the warehouse, back in the world of chaos and struggle. "Jack, he's awake!" a voice shouted, filled with relief and urgency. He turned his head slightly, wincing at the effort, and saw his fellow firefighters gathered around him. Their faces were streaked with soot, their eyes wide with concern. "Stay with us, Jack," another voice said, this one belonging to a paramedic. "You've been through hell, but you're going to be okay." Jack wanted to speak, to tell them what he had seen, but his throat felt raw, and the words wouldn't come. Instead, he closed his eyes and let the world blur around him, his mind replaying the vision over and over. The storm, the swirling forces around Donald Trump, and the cryptic warning from Jesus. It all felt so vivid, so urgent. The journey to the hospital was a haze of pain and fragmented thoughts. Jack drifted in and out of consciousness, the weight of his experience pressing heavily on his chest. By the time he was stabilized and placed in a hospital bed, his physical injuries had been treated, but the burden of his vision remained unshakable. Days passed as Jack recovered. His body healed slowly, but his mind was restless, consumed by the message he had been given. He replayed every word, every image, every moment of his encounter with Jesus. The responsibility he carried felt overwhelming, and he struggled with how to begin sharing what he had seen. The first person Jack confided in was his wife, Emily. She had been by his side every day since the accident, her love and strength a constant source of comfort. Late one evening, as the hospital quieted and the fluorescent lights dimmed, Jack decided it was time to tell her. "Emily," he began, his voice low and hesitant, "there's something I need to tell you. Something that happened while I was gone." She turned to him, her brow furrowing with concern. "What do you mean, gone?" Jack took a deep breath, steadying himself. "When I was trapped under that beam, I didn't just black out. I left. I was somewhere else, somewhere beyond this world." Emily's eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt. Jack continued, describing the radiant realm, the overwhelming presence of Jesus, and the visions he had been shown. He told her about the swirling storm, the forces surrounding Donald Trump, and the warning that humanity stood at a crossroads. Emily listened intently, her expression shifting between disbelief and awe. When Jack finished, she sat in silence for a long moment, processing what she had heard. Finally, she reached for his hand. "Jack, I don't know what to say. It sounds incredible, but I believe you." Her words brought a surge of relief, but Jack knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Telling Emily was one thing, sharing his story with others was another matter entirely. He feared ridicule and skepticism, but he also knew he couldn't stay silent. The first few conversations were difficult. Jack told his closest friends and colleagues, many of whom listened with raised eyebrows and cautious nods. Some dismissed his story as a hallucination or a dream brought on by trauma, but others were deeply moved, sensing the sincerity in his words. As Jack gained confidence, he began speaking to larger groups. Local community events, churches, and firehouse gatherings became platforms for him to share his experience. He focused on the broader themes of his message, the importance of vigilance, the power of truth, and the need for humanity to stand united against forces that sought to divide and manipulate. But whenever Jack mentioned Donald Trump, the reactions grew more polarized. Some people nodded in agreement, seeing the relevance of his warning, while others scoffed, dismissing it as politically charged or irrelevant. Jack pressed on, undeterred. He wasn't trying to sway opinions about the man himself. He was trying to make people see the bigger picture, the battle between light and darkness that surrounded not just Trump, but all leaders and humanity as a whole. One night, after a particularly challenging talk where he faced harsh criticism, Jack sat alone in his hospital room, feeling the weight of his mission. Doubts crept in, whispering that he was wasting his time, that no one would truly listen. But as he closed his eyes, he felt a familiar warmth, a reminder of the light he had seen in that other realm. Jack took a deep breath, the memory of Jesus' words reigniting his resolve. "You are not called to change the entire world on your own," he whispered to himself. "You are called to be a spark." With that thought, he leaned back, the flicker of hope burning brighter in his chest. No matter how difficult the journey, he knew he had a mission to fulfill, and he wouldn't stop until he had done everything in his power to carry the light forward. Jack's decision to share his experience with the world wasn't easy. Each time he stood before an audience, he felt the weight of his words pressing down on him. This wasn't just a story, it was a message, a mission entrusted to him in a realm far beyond human comprehension. Yet every time he spoke, he reminded himself of Jesus' words. Truth carries its own power. Jack's first public speech was in a small community hall filled with friends, neighbors, and fellow firefighters. The room buzzed with quiet conversation as people settled into their seats, curious about what Jack had to say. Some had heard rumors about his near-death experience, while others came out of respect for a man they knew and admired. Jack stood at the front, gripping the edge of the podium, his heart pounding. He began by recounting the fire, the moment he fell beneath the collapsing beam, and the surreal sensation of leaving his body. The room grew silent as he described the radiant realm, the overwhelming presence of Jesus, and the visions he had been shown. His voice trembled slightly when he spoke of the swirling storm around Donald Trump and the forces of light and darkness battling for influence. Jack didn't embellish or try to dramatize the experience. He simply told the truth as he had seen it. When he finished, the room was quiet. Jack scanned the audience, his chest tight with anticipation. Finally, an older man in the back stood and began clapping. Others joined in, and soon the room erupted into applause. Jack exhaled, relief and gratitude washing over him. But even amidst the applause, he could see faces in the crowd that remained skeptical, their expressions guarded. After the talk, people approached him with questions. Some asked about his experience, while others challenged him, suggesting it could have been a hallucination or a product of oxygen deprivation. Jack answered as best he could, never arguing, but always standing firm in his conviction. "I can't prove what I saw," he said, "but I know it was real, and I believe it's a message worth sharing." As Jack continued speaking at more events, the reactions became more varied. In some places, his story was met with awe and inspiration. People thanked him for his courage and shared how his words had reignited their faith or given them a new perspective on life. In other places, he faced criticism and outright hostility. Some accused him of using his story for attention or pushing a political agenda. The mention of Donald Trump often sparked heated debates, with people projecting their own beliefs and biases onto Jack's message. Despite the challenges, Jack pressed on. He began to refine his approach, focusing less on the specifics of Trump and more on the broader themes of leadership, influence, and the battle between light and darkness. He emphasized the importance of prayer, vigilance, and unity, urging people to look beyond their divisions and work together for the greater good. One of the most significant turning points came during a televised interview. Jack had been invited to speak on a national program, a platform that would allow his story to reach millions. The interviewer, a seasoned journalist, was known for being skeptical and unflinching in her questions. Jack knew it wouldn't be an easy conversation, but he welcomed the opportunity. The interview began with the journalist asking about Jack's background and his work as a firefighter. He spoke about his career, the dangers he had faced, and the camaraderie of his team. Then, the conversation shifted to his near-death experience. "You've said you met Jesus," the journalist began, her tone neutral but probing, "and that he gave you a message about Donald Trump. Some people find that hard to believe. How do you respond to those who think it's just a figment of your imagination?" Jack paused, choosing his words carefully. "I understand why people might doubt me," he said. "It's not every day you hear someone say they've stood in the presence of Jesus. But I'm not here to convince anyone. I'm here to share what I experienced and what I believe is a warning and a call to action." The journalist leaned forward. "And why Trump? Why is he central to this message?" Jack met her gaze, his voice steady. "It's not about Trump as a person. It's about the influence he holds and the forces at work around him. What I saw wasn't just about him, it was about the choices we all make and how they shape the world. Leaders carry an immense responsibility, but so do we, the people who choose to follow or challenge them." The interview sparked a wave of reactions. Some viewers were deeply moved, flooding social media with messages of support and reflection. Others dismissed Jack's story, labeling it as a fabrication or a ploy for attention. Jack tried not to dwell on the negativity, focusing instead on the lives he could touch. Over time, Jack's message began to resonate in unexpected ways. Faith leaders reached out to him, inviting him to speak at churches and conferences. Community organizers asked him to participate in events promoting unity and dialogue. Even some political figures, intrigued by his story, sought his perspective. But Jack's mission wasn't without its struggles. He often felt the weight of the responsibility he carried, and the criticism he faced sometimes left him questioning whether he was making a difference. In those moments, he would retreat to a quiet place, close his eyes, and remember the radiant realm, the peace, the love, and the light that had filled him. It was those memories that kept him going. One evening, after a particularly challenging day, Jack sat on his porch, staring at the stars. He thought about the storm he had seen in his vision, the swirling forces battling for the soul of humanity. The fight between light and darkness was far from over, but Jack took comfort in knowing he wasn't alone. Each time he shared his story, each time he sparked a conversation or inspired a prayer, he was doing his part to carry the light forward. And so, Jack continued his journey, speaking, listening, and encouraging others to see the light within themselves. He knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he also knew that even the smallest spark could ignite a flame that would shine through the darkest of times.